Secret of Mana is a 1993 action role-playing game developed and published by Square for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It is a sequel to the 1991 game Seiken Densetsu, released in North America as Final Fantasy Adventure. It was the first Seiken Densetsu title to be marked as part of the Mana series rather than Final Fantasy series. Set in a high fantasy universe, the game follows three heroes as they attempt to prevent an empire from conquering the world with the power of an ancient flying fortress. Secret of Mana is my favorite Super Nintendo game, and after doing tons of research from websites and strategy guides, I'm going to try my best to give you the most accurate version of the story I can in this video. Randy was out playing where he shouldn't have been and fell from the log bridge. His friends went back home to Potos without him. Alone at the base of the falls, he looked around for a way home when he met the ghost. "Randy, remove the sword," it said. So he pulled the rusty sword from the stone in the middle of the pond. He took the sword and learned how to use it. First on the low underbrush, which was cut cleanly, then on some of the dangerous creatures that inhabited the forest. The world had become more threatening and less friendly, and it was useful to have a sword for protection. Soon he could feel his skill with the new sword growing. Every time he defeated an enemy, he gained in the wisdom of battle, in which was still useful wisdom to have. By the time he had returned to Potos, he was far more skilled than before, but the village elder was very angry with him for pulling out the sword. Suddenly, a great earthquake shook the land, and a hole opened up in the ground where Randy stood. There, standing in front of him, was the mantis ant, a terrible enemy for a young boy with just a rusted sword. Randy circled and charged up the power of his sword, striking the mantis ant with his strongest blows. Even though the monster fought back with iron-hard claws and magic spells, Randy did not give up, eventually vanquishing the mantis ant. And receiving a sword orb as his prize. When the battle was over, a man named Gemma told Randy to find a way to re-energize the sword because it had grown weak from fighting the mantis ant. Gemma told him to visit the water guardian at the water palace. Randy went to visit the elder, who was still very angry. The elder blamed Randy for bringing the mantis ant to attack their village. Ultimately, the elder banished Randy from the village. But before he left, he felt sorry for him and told Randy a little bit about his childhood, even though his past was still a mystery. Heading out into the world, Randy decided to follow Gemma's advice and go to the water palace. Approaching the water palace, Randy encountered some soldiers. The captain, Dyluck, told him that they were after a witch named Eleni, then promptly disappeared through a portal to storm her castle. Reaching the water palace, Randy walked to the entrance without hesitation. Making his way through the palace, he met Gemma at the altar of the Menaceed, and there he met Luca. They told him things about the Empire and their plans to dissolve the seals from the world's Menaceeds. Along with that, he learned more about his sword and what must be done to revive it. Luca told Randy about the 8 palaces around the world, each with their own Menaceed. She told him that he must hold up his sword to each Menaceed in order to recharge it. Gemma told him to search for a dwarf village near Gaia's navel, where he will be able to reforge his sword, finally handing him a spear, another mana weapon, to help him along his journey. Heading due south out of the water palace, continuing his search for the dwarf village, Randy was attacked and captured by a band of goblins. The goblins were planning on cooking him in their stew, but after being distracted by their music, Randy heard someone behind him. A girl. She snuck into the goblin camp and rescued Randy, even though she was looking for someone else. Running off without even telling him her name. Still on the search for Gaia's navel, Randy found the town of Pandora, where he decided to ask for directions. But every person he talked to seemed to be in some sort of daze. Very confused, he thought he should go to the castle and talk to someone there. Luckily, the people in the castle were able to talk to him, but they still weren't very helpful. Continuing on up more and more stairs, Randy found the girl who rescued him. She was having an argument with her father and decided to run away. Once she discovered that Randy had a sword, she joined him, telling him that they have to go help Dyluck fight Eleni. Randy tried to tell her that he needed to go to Gaia's navel to reforge his sword, but Prim would not hear of it. Realizing he was fighting a losing battle, Randy agreed. They fought their way to the haunted forest, mastering the weapons that they had. Inside the forest, they eventually hit a dead end, realizing that they needed an axe to break through the barrier that was blocking their way. Prim mentioned to Randy that she knew of a dwarf blacksmith in Gaia's navel, possibly forge an axe for them. Randy and Prim found 2 cave entrances, and deciding to go to the left one, they fought their way through the cave, fighting all sorts of monsters. They kept going until they discovered another roadblock, a pool of lava. Noticing there was another door near them, they entered into a room where they found a skull on the wall. Curious, they pressed it, and hearing a noise in the distance. Going back the way they came, they discovered the lava was gone. They could move on. Searching high and low through the cave, they found a treasure chest containing the magic rope, an item that allowed them to escape any place they had ventured into. They kept making their way through the cave until they found another skull switch on the wall. Striking it caused a boulder to fall in the other room below them. When they went back to check, a path had opened, and they were able to climb to the entrance to the dwarf village. Entering the village, they were intending to visit the blacksmith first, but they found a sign that led them to the world-famous exhibition hut. They had to check that out. Paying their fee to enter, Randy and Prim sat down and heard the story of a sprite that had been washed away from his village by a great flood, needing money in order to return home. The sprite begged the pair for any amount of money they could give. Taking pity on the sprite, they gave some. As they were leaving the show and on their way to the blacksmith, Randy and Prim overheard the sprite and the village elder laughing at how they had fooled Randy. Enraged, the pair rushed into the room and confronted the sprite. When the Elder and the Sprite realize that they have been caught, they apologize and return the money. Trying to get back on track, Randy and Prim went to the blacksmith. There they met Watts. He reforged Randy's rusty sword using the orb he had obtained from the mantis ant, and made it much stronger. Watts then realized that his sword was the mana sword, the finest sword Watts had ever seen. Turning the rusty sword into the broadsword, the two thanked Watts and asked if he could make an axe for them. He said that he could, but they would have to return later. Agreeing, the pair left. No sooner had they stepped outside of Watts' shop, the earth shook again. They heard something coming. It was Tropicalo, a large plant monster that rose from the ground. Tropicalo attacked Randy and Prim by spitting pumpkin bombs at them and tried to entangle them with its vines, then boring underground trying to attack from a different side. Eventually, with patience and swiftness, the pair defeated Tropicalo, winning them a spear orb. After the ruckus with Tropicalo, the Elder rushed over to Randy and Prim and thanked them for their help, telling the party about a sealed palace nearby and asking if they would mind taking the Sprite with them. The Sprite joined the party with his boomerang and Chobin's bow. They went straight back to Watts, who not only forged them an axe, but also upgraded their spear, then showing them a secret passage to the surface. Using the shortcut, the party quickly made their way to the surface and found the teleporter that led back into the haunted forest. Using the axe that Watts had forged for them, they were able to carry on, eventually fighting through all the puzzles that the forest threw at them. When they got to Eleni's castle, they fought through the hordes of monsters that roamed the grounds. Finding a way into the castle, passing through the gates and fighting monsters, they came to a point where they could not proceed. There was a switch on the floor that when they pressed it, nothing happened, so the only way they could go was to the basement. So down to the basement they went. There they found a dungeon holding Dialect soldiers, but luckily the soldiers knew what to do to get to Eleni. They had to go back upstairs and all three of them had to stand on the switch at once, then the bridge would appear and allow them to proceed. After doing this, they came to another room with a wall blocking their path, but luckily they found another switch that removed the wall. Entering through the door at the north took them straight to Eleni. They spoke to her about getting rid of the seal to the underground palace. She refused and ran off to the next room. Not once to give up so easily, the party followed her. There they saw Dialect standing next to Eleni. When Prim tried to get to him, he suddenly vanished. Eleni sent Dialect to Thanatos in the ruins of Pandora. Wanting to quickly get rid of Randy and company, Eleni sent her pet tiger after them. Spiky Tiger appeared and knocked the party unconscious. Suddenly, Randy woke up and struck the tiger, causing it to leap in the air and land on one of the perches. Since it was up in the air, it was unable to be hit with short-range weapons. Prim quickly took the bow and began firing arrows at the tiger. Eventually defeating Spiky Tiger. Then healing up the party quickly and rushed to find Eleni. Eleni looked different when the party got to her. She apologized for what had happened, telling them that the herb she had traded caused her to turn evil. Offering information to them about Dialect, telling them how to get rid of the seal to the underground palace. They would need the help of the water elemental. She also gave them a whip that was sitting in a nearby chest. When they finally were able to leave the castle, Randy heard a voice. It was Luca. She told him she needed their help. They quickly rushed back to the water palace. When they got back there, Luca told them that Undine, the water elemental, was in trouble in a cave behind a waterfall. So off they went back outside to the east, having to fight off monsters, because without the protection of Undine, monsters roamed around the water palace. When they reached the cave, they found the biting lizard, which if they weren't careful, the lizard would eat them. After getting rid of the biting lizard, Randy got another weapon orb and a door opened up in the back. Going through the back of the cave, they found Undine. And as a way to thank them, she let Prim and the sprite use her water magic. She also gave them a new weapon, a pole dart. They were ready to head for the underground palace. Returning to the dwarf village in Gaia's navel, they went to the entrance to the underground palace. Remembering what Eleni told them, the sprite used freeze on the orb and the orb vanished, along with the lava blocking the way. There they reached the underground palace. It was full of monsters, but the party was ready. Fighting through the palace, they came to some switches that caused a bridge to appear. Then using their new whip, they were able to cross gaps leading off into the west, making their way to the mana seed. Gnome, the earth elemental, appeared and tried to stop them. Suddenly the party heard a noise. Gnome fled, and standing in front of them was the Fire Gigas. The Fire Gigas was a powerful giant that was able to disappear and reappear at will. Along with that, he was able to use fire magic. But the party was smart. They used freeze on Fire Gigas and got rid of him in short order. Gnome appeared again and was very grateful for the party's help. He allowed them to use his earth magic. Randy then ran up to the seed and held aloft the sword, charging the sword with the seed's power. After having touched the seed, the sprite was thrown back. He then remembered where he came from. He was from the Upper Land. Knowing that their next stop was in Pandora, the party headed that way. But when they arrived, all the townspeople were still like zombies. Exploring the town, they ran into Prim's friend, Fana, but as soon as they went to talk to her, she vanished. They knew something was wrong and decided to go straight to the ruins and see what was going on. Once they reached the ruins, they saw Fana again at the entrance. She was acting very strange and she kept saying she was going on a one-way trip, then turning and walking past the guards. Angry at what was going on, Prim forcefully pushed her way past the guards and went inside. Every room in the ruins was full of new monsters they had never seen before, so they were glad they knew how to use their weapons so efficiently. They ran through the twisting corridors to the ruins until eventually running right into Thanatos, waiting for them. Thanatos was holding both Dialek and Fana captive. The whole time the party was questioning him, Thanatos kept acting like he was trying to make a better world, but Randy and company weren't fooled. Tired of their questioning, Thanatos opened a trapdoor and the three friends dropped into the lair of Wallface. This strange enemy had 3 eyes that shot beams from them, so avoiding them as much as possible was ideal. Sprite decided to call on Gnome's help, piling on Earthslide. Not long after doing this, Wallface was no more. Making their way back to Thanatos, Thanatos was amazed at how strong the party actually was, and he decided to release the people from Pandora and Fana, but held Dialect captive, suddenly vanishing. Before they left, they ran into Gemma, who told them that they needed to return to the Water Palace. Rushing back to the Water Palace, Luca told them that the mana seed had been stolen. She had overheard the thieves mentioning Gaia's navel, so that is where they had to go. Gemma was standing next to a huge hole in the ground in the dwarf village. He told them that the thieves were below ground. They jumped down the hole and landed on a huge sand ship. Going inside, they started exploring, eventually finding out who had stolen the mana seed. It was the Scorpion army. They weren't going to hand over the seed so easily, and they wanted to test out their new robot on Randy and friends, Kilroy. Unfortunately, by putting the mana seed inside Kilroy, the Scorpion army caused the robot to become uncontrollable. Randy, Prim, and the Sprite readied their weapons and began attacking. Randy and Prim made sure to dodge the robot, attacking when the time was right. The Sprite steadied himself and began to pile Earthslide on Kilroy. Even though it wasn't particularly weak to magic, every little bit helped. After a lengthy battle, Kilroy self-destructed, and the party received the mana seed. Using the rope, the party returned to the surface and headed straight for the Water Palace. But they weren't out of the woods yet. Entering the Water Palace, the situation was dire. Geshtar of the Empire was holding Luca hostage and demanding the mana seed. The party had two options: hand over the seed or run. They decided to run, but unfortunately Geshtar stopped them and took the seed anyway. Having what he came for, he threw the party to his pet Jabberwocky. The Jabberwocky was very dangerous, breathing poison and knocking the party unconscious. On top of that, it could heal itself. But Randy and company were ready. The Sprite laid on Earthslide again multiple times until they finally defeated Jabberwocky. Exhausted after the battle, the party went to check on Luca, telling Randy to restore the seal on the water seed. Just then, Gemma arrived and told Randy how to reach the upper land. It was by cannon travel. Ready to leave, Luca had some more advice for them. She told them about Sage Joch, who lived in the lofty mountains, telling him to visit all 8 of the world's palaces and reactivate the seeds. Taking Gemma and Luca's advice, the party head straight for cannon travel and are on their way to the upper land. When they landed, they were in the Great Forest, a forest that is divided into the 4 seasons. The party had landed in the winter section. Oddly enough, they found Watts, but instead of questioning it, they had him reforge their weapons. Deciding to ask for directions, they went to the first Moogle they saw. The Moogles told them that Pebblers had taken over the Moogle village. When they arrived at the village, the Pebblers instantly attacked. The Pebblers liked to dig underground and throw boulders. With persistence, they got rid of the Pebblers. The Moogles could finally return to their village. Nico joined them and was able to sell them any items and equipment they needed. Speaking to the Moogles before they left, they told Randy a riddle that would help them. Walk the seasons from spring to winter, spring again, and you can enter. After discussing amongst themselves, they knew what they had to do. They had to walk back to the spring section of the forest, then go through all the seasons and return to spring again. So that's what they did. When they finished the circuit through the seasons, they heard a loud sound from the east. When they went to look, they found a new path leading north, eventually finding the Sprite Village. But when they arrived, they found the village was in shambles. Confused, they headed north, only to find Springbeak. Springbeak was responsible for the destruction of the Sprite's village, but the Sprite was going to get revenge. Dropping several earth slides on Springbeak felled the beast. When it was gone, they continued north to the Wind Palace. When they entered the palace, they met the Sprite's grandfather, who was protecting the palace, but the Empire's men had already been there, and the seal was broken. After making sure the old man was okay, he told them that the only help he could provide was the power of the wind elemental, Sylphid. One of Sylphid's powers, Analyzer, is what Prim had to use on the orbs they find to tell them which element is needed to open it. Before they left, Grandpa told them about a legendary white dragon that lives in a cave north of Matango. Knowing what they had to do next, Randy sealed the seed. The party traveled back to spring and then headed west when they saw an orb that blocked their path. Using Analyzer like Grandpa said, it told them that Sylphid would work. The Sprite tried air blasts on the orb and it vanished, opening the way forward. Finally, they found the entrance to a cave far to the north, which was the lair of the kimono bird, that had Pebblers at their command. Using the axe Watts had forged for them, they bashed through the stalagmites to make a path. When they exited the cave, they realized they had arrived in Matango, a place where friendly mushroom people lived. Their next stop was Matango Castle, where King Truffle instantly recognized Randy as the Knight of Legend. He told them the prophecy of the Mannonites. He also told them about a white dragon he saw recently in battle with a great serpent. Afterward, he offered them a treasure that he kept upstairs in a chest. It was a weapon orb, and wouldn't you know it, Watts was in the castle as well. So the party had all their weapons forward to continue their journey. Taking a back door from the castle, the party found another cave. This cave was infested with kimono birds and nemesis owls, who were easily able to confuse the party. Eventually finding another orb, Prim called upon Sylphid and again discovered that Earthslide would work. Once the orb vanished, a new pathway opened, leading outside to a heavily overgrown area, where a great viper was waiting for them. The great viper could have done a lot of damage to the party, but the sprite had been trading up Sylphid along the way, so they were prepared. Using Thunderbolt on the Viper quickly destroyed it. Obtaining another sword orb, the party saw that a new passage had opened to the north. They quickly went to investigate. They found a new cave, which was the entrance to the Dragon's Lair. Expecting to find a great white dragon, they were surprised when all they found was a baby white dragon. King Truffle helped them take the baby dragon back to Matango, where he agreed to take care of it until it grew up, naming it Flammy. Truffle told them that their next destination should be the Fire Palace in Kakara Desert. There was a cannon travel center in the area south of Matango that they could use. Finally, they headed for the cannon travel and sought passage for Kakara Desert. After enduring a high-flying ride by the cannon, the party lands in the middle of a dry desert. After traveling for a while, they thought all hope was lost. Then they spotted a sand ship far in the distance. But once they boarded the ship, the party were mistaken for Imperial spies and forced to work on the ship. Randy was taken to the engine room, where he met Sergo, the pirate. After some convincing, Randy was able to get Sergo to help him escape. Searching the rest of the ship alone, he found a set of stairs that led below deck. There was the sprite, who had just eaten all the food reserves on the ship. The cooks, not being happy about this, forced Randy to take the sprite with him. 2 down, 1 more to go. Randy and the sprite continued to search the ship. On the lowest deck, they found a doorway, and inside they found 2 guards guarding another door. The sprite, being the prankster that he was, told the guards that rats had eaten all the food on the ship. As the guards went to investigate, Randy and the sprite entered the room. There they found Prim and Maury, the second in command. Just then the general came in, and once Randy and company were finally able to prove who they were and were about to be set free, Maury stopped them. The general was calling his guards when the Empire attacked the ship. Suddenly, Maury wanted to surrender, but the general wanted to fight. Unfortunately, all the soldiers sided with Maury, so there was no fight. Everyone went topside to see what was going on, and there stood Geshtar. Geshtar was surprised to see that Randy and company had survived and were here on this ship. Wanting to get rid of them once and for all, he challenged them to a battle. Geshtar hopped on his mech cycle and attacked the group, charging forward, running over Randy and his friends. But the sprite brought down loads of thunderbolts on the mech rider, eventually rendering him scrap metal. Randy and company told the general that they knew Gemma, so the general was all too willing to help. He told them that there was a village to the north called Kakara, and the best way to get there. Thanking him for his help, the party set off, eventually finding their way to Kakara, and once there they asked about the Fire Palace. But unfortunately, the fire elemental, Salamando, was missing, but they told him that there was this village that suddenly became warm in the ice country. They decided that that is where they needed to go to look for Salamando. Finding the nearest cannon travel center and prepared themselves for the ice country. Venturing westward, they found Toto Village, a friendly village of helpful creatures. The people of the village told Randy of a paradise hidden in the Crystal Forest, and a strange old man living on the outskirts of Ice Forest. Heading west from the village, they came upon a small settlement in the middle of the Ice Forest. A reindeer and a snowman greeted them. The reindeer told them that its master had gone missing, and that in the ice palace a monster suddenly appeared. Feeling sorry for the reindeer, they decided to help him. So going southward, they continued their journey. Walking through the labyrinthian crystal forest, they found themselves at a passage. Going north, trouble struck again. It was Borealface. Borealface was a strange creature, a relative to Tropicalo, who would dig into the ice and then reappear spitting pumpkin bombs, much like its cousin. Using Magic Absorb, the sprite was able to render Borealface pretty much useless and defeated it promptly. Heading back into the Crystal Forest, they found their way through until they discovered another path north. They realized the air was warm in this place, like in summer. When they entered the small settlement, they found a beautiful green village, with an old stove in the middle. Confused, the party went forward. It seemed that the source of the heat was that old stove, and standing next to the old stove were some familiar characters. It was the Scorpion Army. Not being the brightest, they asked Randy to guard the stove while they had to take care of something. Suddenly, the stove started banging. Randy hesitantly opened it, and there was Salamando, the fire elemental. Grateful for being set free and realizing Randy is the Mana Knight, Salamando offered his assistance. Now they had 4 elementals at their disposal. Suddenly, the commander of the Scorpion Army returned, and was furious when she realized that it was Randy and company for releasing Salamando. On top of that, the 2 underlings volunteered the information that they saw an old guy around where they had captured the fire elemental. Heading north, they were on their way back through the forest to the Ice Palace. Looming in front of them was an enormous blue castle. Gathering all their courage, they proceeded inside. After getting through several switch puzzles, they arrived on the second floor with 2 doors. The one on the right led to a short path that ended with another floor switch. Flipping the switch caused a bridge to appear and led to another stairway. Continuing on, they found a chest that contained another weapon orb, so they retraced their steps to the pathway with the 2 doors, deciding to take the left door this time. Finding another stairway, they ran quickly to the top of the stairs, leading to another small room with what seemed like no exit. But looking on the floor, they saw 2 switches. Flipping them caused a hidden door to appear. This door led to the 3rd floor, which was a great library, but bookshelves blocked their way. Finding yet another set of switches and flipping those made the floor give way, and they dropped into a tadpole nest. Having fought these creatures before, they were no problem to the group. Fighting one at a time seemed to be the best strategy, then enlisting the help of Salamando to finish them off. After defeating the tadpoles, they found a doorway leading north from the library. Fighting through the blue drops, Randy used the whip to cross the gaps that were in front of him, and in the center of the room there was a strange symbol on the floor. Stepping on it teleported them to somewhere else. A loud voice demanded that they leave. They refused, and the Frost Gigas appeared. The Frost Gigas was a giant that could cast ice magic and sometimes turn himself into ice crystals and move it about the room, only able to be struck when he was whole. The sprite knew what he had to do though. Using Salamando, the party quickly melted the Frost Gigas. When he was gone, another familiar man appeared. As they were talking, the reindeer shouted from behind, "Master!" This was the person the reindeer was looking for. Santa explained what had happened. He wanted to create a giant Christmas tree using the mana seed, but this was not the intent the seed was to be used for, so it caused him to transform to the Frost Gigas. Sorry for what had happened, Santa gave Randy the fire seed. The party then made their way back to Toto Village. Strangely, Watts had followed them here too. Not thinking much of it, they reforged any weapons that needed it. Ready for the next challenge, they returned to Kakara. Randy and his friends set out to the desert in search of the Fire Palace. They knew they must return the seed. Fighting through hordes of monsters, they eventually arrived at the entrance to the Fire Palace. Sand stingers and spider legs made the way difficult, but they fought their way into the palace and began to explore, fighting their way through and coming to another stairway that led downstairs, entering a room full of unlit torches. But standing on another switch caused all the torches to ignite. Then a crystal orb appeared. After finding out what element it needed, the sprite used freeze, causing all but 2 of the torches to go out. Curious, the party went and walked through the 2 lit torches. As soon as they passed by them, a new stairway appeared out of the ground. Reluctantly, they proceeded. When they arrived in the next room, they discovered a Minotaur. The Minotaur could do great damage with its long horns, so they would need to dodge as much as possible. Using Thunderbolt on the Minotaur was too much for it, and it was quickly defeated. After the fight, Randy noticed the mana seed in the distance. Immediately he went up and held his sword to it. Restoring the seal on the mana seed caused them to feel much more courage to endure their journey, and using the magic rope, they quickly headed back to Kakara village. When they got back to Kakara, they learned of the resistance trying to fight against the Empire in Southtown, so they knew that is where they needed to go. Southtown was not a very friendly place, but Randy did learn something about the Emperor and met a strange woman named Mara. Talking to Mara in her house, she recognized Randy as the Mana Knight. Randy told her about Gemma, and she knew who he was, telling them that Gemma was a Tasnican spy. She told them how to get into Northtown, but the way to get there was through the sewers, and the guards wouldn't let just anyone through without a password. Heading toward the sewers, they approached the guard and gave him the password 634, and he let them pass. The sewers were disgusting and full of monsters, but they kept moving forward, making it safely through the other end, where they found the Resistance headquarters. There they met Chrissy, the leader of the Resistance. Not trusting them, she thought they might be spies of the Empire, but after Prim mentioned Diluc, Chrissy knew they were okay. Chrissy told them that Diluc was draining people's energy in the ruins east of town. Leaving the Resistance base, they went to the ruins, and standing in the outskirts was Fana, who seemed to be acting really strangely. Knowing that Fana wasn't herself, Prim tried to snap her out of it, but they realized they needed help. They asked Chrissy to help, and she took Fana to the local doctor. The three companions took off into the ruins to find Diluc. This place was huge. Exploring the ruins, they found many monsters and discovered several weapon orbs. Continuing on, they explored the exit to the south and found a floor switch, which caused a hidden door to appear in the lower area. Finally, they came to a room with long, spiky trails. Far to the east, they found another switch, which made the spikes lower, and were able to enter the door to the north. Entering a large room, their way was blocked by a huge wall, so they were going to have to find a way to get through. But just then, the wall turned into Doom's Wall. Just like when they fought Wallface before, they used the same strategy on Doom's Wall. Blasting it with Earthslide and making short work of Doom's Wall. After defeating Doom's Wall, they continued through the door to the north, finding Diluc. Prim was overjoyed, but she quickly realized that something wasn't right. Diluc was under Thanatos' control. Diluc started draining Prim's energy. Luckily, Randy was able to knock some sense into Diluc. Diluc told Randy and the sprite to go through the door at the back of the Great Hall. There was Thanatos, wanting to make Randy and the sprite watch as he takes control of Prim, but not being under Thanatos' control anymore, Diluc sent her some of his energy. Thanatos, enraged, threw them to the vampire. The vampire would fly around the room, making it difficult to attack, but the sprite kept hitting him with Thunderbolt, and Vampire was quickly defeated. When they returned to the Great Hall, Thanatos and Diluc were gone. Returning to the Resistance headquarters, Chrissy told them that they had received news from the Emperor and that he wanted a truce. Randy and company didn't know if they could trust the Emperor, but Chrissy and her friends had gone ahead already, so they decided to check out the castle. Arriving at the castle, they expected to see a large meeting, but there was no one around. There was only the Emperor, and now that he had the Mana Knight and the Resistance right where he wanted them, he sprang his trap. And immediately they were thrown in jail. Chrissy couldn't believe the Emperor's betrayal, but before they could discuss it any further, the guards came and forced Randy and his friends over a ledge, where they fell into the lair of the Metal Mantis. The Metal Mantis reminded Randy of his fight with the Mantis Ant back in Podos, but now that the party had the elementals at their command, The sprite used Thunderbolt again. Metal Mantis was destroyed. When he was gone, they noticed a switch on the floor. Stepping on it, they found themselves in a damp basement. Actually made their way back to the jail. Stepping on a switch, they were able to release the resistance members. After searching the roof of the castle and finding some more weapon orbs, they climbed down and walked in the main entrance to the castle. This time there were no guards in front of the western stairway. That's the way they went. This passageway led to the rooftop, and the only way out was through some double doors. These doors led to a banquet room with a switch at the back of the room. This led them through more areas of the castle and eventually leading to the room where they first met the Emperor. Not expecting to see the Mana Knight again, he was convinced that Randy was a worthy adversary. But Geshtar interrupted and asked to avenge him for his previous defeat. Heading to the top of the castle to face off against Geshtar again, he was still using the same tactics as before. Again, the sprite pummeled him with thunderbolts, defeating Geshtar once again. But this time he vowed to destroy the whole castle. Just in the nick of time, King Truffle arrived on Flammy, now grown up. Truffle gave Randy a drum, Flammy's favorite toy, that will call Flammy to them anytime they need him. The white dragon streaked down, gathered them up, and rose quickly into the air. Once in the air, they decided to take King Truffle back to Matango. Truffle once again told them to seek help in the lofty mountains, so they called upon Flammy and were off. Flying southwest, as King Truffle told them to, they came to the lofty mountains, where they found a small village, and there they landed. Asking around, they learned that there were monsters everywhere, in a cave leading to the Palace of Darkness, and leading up to where someone named Sage Joch is found. When they were ready, they left the town to the south, and soon found the entrance to the Palace of Darkness. Inside the palace, they fought several new, much stronger enemies, eventually leading to a large cavern. Finding a switch that made a post appear nearby but weren't able to get to it. So backtracking, they found another switch that caused the main gate to open. Along the way, they had to go all the way back to where they had first started to get to a new cave. This cave led to a long room. Entering an exit to the north, this led them out onto a narrow path with another floor switch. When they stepped on it, an invisible bridge with blue flames appeared. Doing this several more times, they reached the archway to the north, leading to a dark room where Shade, the elemental of darkness, decided to test the Mana Knight to see if he was worthy. His test was that he had to defeat Lime Slime, a giant amoeba-like creature. Lime Slime tried to envelop Randy and company. Prim found that Salamanda was able to cause massive damage, so the sprite piled on Exploder until Lime Slime couldn't take it anymore. Having passed the test, Shade greeted them and introduced himself, offering his powers to Randy and his companions. Then, as he had done several times before, Randy sealed the mana seed with his sword. The three friends set out to find Sage Joch at the top of the mountain. At the top, they found an unfriendly creature who commanded them to leave. It said that Joch had gone to the Gold Isle in the northeast, and nothing else. Confused, they called Flammy and took off to find the City of Gold. Asking around in the Gold City, the people told them that there was a golden tower, but it was off limits. Trying to enter it anyway, they discovered that it was locked. Talking to the townspeople again, Randy learned about a Tasnican spy who last had the missing key. Randy called Flammy and decided to pay Mara a visit in Southtown. Mara told them that her husband stole the key and gave it to them. Returning to the Gold City, they went into the tower. Entering the tower was a weapon orb waiting for them. Taking it, they climbed the huge tower. Before they reached the top, they were attacked by Blue Spike, a relative of Eleni's spiky tiger. He sprang up in the air and landed on the party, but the sprite steadied itself and hit it with as many earth slides as it could throw at it. Defeating it, they continued up the tower. Almost at the top, they were then attacked by the Gorgon Bull. The Gorgon Bull attacked in a similar manner to the Minotaur, but the sprite had the answer. Using Thunderbolt was very effective, so they hurried to destroy it quickly. Finally, at the top, they saw the Mana Seed, where Lumina, the Elemental of Light, met them and told them about how King Mammon was using the mana power to make gold, but the mana power should only be given to the Mana Knight. After joining the party, Randy went and sealed the seed, but Sage Joch was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, they returned to the mountains to find Joch. Even though they had obtained the light and dark elementals, their reception was the same. This time it said that Joch was in the Moon Palace, which was somewhere in the Kakara Desert, so calling Flammy, they flew off to the desert. Heading north, they met Karen, the ferryman who took them to the Moon Palace. They quickly entered, hoping to find Joch. The entrance to the Moon Palace leads to a completely dark room, with only a few flames that gave them a clue as where they were. Heading west and then north, they found another crystal orb. Learning that Lumina would work, Prim tried Lucent Beam, and they were transported to a normal-looking palace room. In the palace room, Luna greeted them and gave them his powers, and again Randy held aloft his sword to seal the Mana Seed. 7 seeds down, 1 more to go. But more importantly, where was Joch? Calling Flammy, once they reached the Sea of Wonders, they once again went back to the mountain. Again, he wasn't there. This time it said he was in Tasnica. Randy and company were really getting frustrated, but again they called Flammy and flew toward Tasnica, which was southwest of the Sea of Wonders. When they landed, they began to search for someone who might know where Joch was, but they didn't find him. But they did find Gemma. Gemma told them that everyone was looking for a spy. Not being able to find Joch, they decided to help look for the spy. Eventually, coming to the throne room, they spoke to the king, but something wasn't right with him. It turns out the king was an imposter. It was the Dark Stalker. The Dark Stalker was no match for the Mana Knight. Prim found that conveniently, Lumina worked well against him, so she blasted him with Lucent Beam until the Dark Stalker was no more. Finding the actual king, he recognized Randy as the real Mana Knight and gave him a weapon orb to help him on his quest. Speaking again to Gemma, Gemma told them about true courage and warned the group that the Empire was close to achieving its goal. He told them to find Sage Joch and to learn true courage. Begrudgingly, Randy called Flammy. Back at the top of the mountain, they found Sage Joch, but they couldn't understand what he was saying. Joch, the creature they had spoke to before, translated it. It was time for the test of courage. Joch cleared a path to the north. The path to the test was treacherous. There were so many monsters everywhere, and there were stalagmites to cut down and gaps to jump. Coming to a fork in the path, they took the eastern path. After crossing a gap with the whip, they finally arrived at the test of courage. The test for the Mana Knight was to meet his double in combat. Each party member had a counterpart. The strongest was the boy's double, so they all attacked him first, then the other two. While their powers combined, they were quickly able to defeat the duplicates and complete the test. Feeling very accomplished, they made their way back to the old man. But the old man was nothing but an illusion. It turns out, Joch was actually Joch. They had been led on a wild goose chase by Joch in order to prepare themselves for the test of courage. After passing the test, Joch told them to head for the tree palace above the coral reef. Finding the coral reef, they landed in the middle. But as soon as they entered, they were confronted by the Emperor and his lieutenants. The Emperor was gloating because he had succeeded in breaking all the mana seals around the world, and was about to raise the Mana Fortress. Standing next to him was Sheeks, and it turned out that he was the Dark Stalker in Tasnica, and volunteered to try again, transforming into Agarapalon. Sheeks told the party about the contract with the underworld the Emperor had made. Agarapalon was a strange creature that could roll into a ball or extend 2 large clawed feet. The sprite was able to lower his defense and hit him with Earth Slide and Thunderbolt. Egagrappalon couldn't stand up against the attacks and was destroyed. After its defeat, they ran toward the Mana Seed trying to save the seal, but they were too late. Dryad appeared, the tree elemental. Dryad told them about the sunken continent that was about to rise, and told them to leave. Dryad was just about to give up hope, but the sprite convinced him to join them. Dryad agreed. The palace started to rumble, and quickly, Randy summoned Flammy, and they flew into the air, and helplessly watched as the sunken continent rose above the water's surface. They descended, only to find that the continent had risen, raising the Grand Palace. Gemma was there, and he had brought troops to help hold back the Empire, and he told them the bad news. The Mana Fortress had also risen with the continent. Gemma asked them if they could find the underground city and try to catch up with the Emperor, even though it wasn't fully powered. Fighting their way down the stairs, they hurried to catch up with the soldiers, eventually reaching the entrance to the underground city. Inside there was a torrent of water that fell into the room, disappearing into a deep pit. Proceeding on, they had to use the axe to clear the way ahead. There they found another weapon orb and exited through the grating leading north. Battling their way up to the waterfalls, they had to hit switches as they slid down to turn off the flow, finding a doorway to the north. Going through, they came upon the Hydra. Living in water, they decided that fire would be their best bet, so the sprite used Salamando on the Hydra, eventually taking it down. After defeating the Hydra, the Emperor appeared with his lieutenants again. Thanatos was all set for attacking the group, but the Emperor was confident that the Mana Fortress would take care of them. After searching a while, they found Chrissy and the Resistance. One of the soldiers had a clue for them: red, blue, yellow, green. Not knowing what he meant, they saved it for later. Making their way to a lower floor, they found a force field, and when they stood in the middle of the 4 light patches in the floor, the force field opened and they were able to continue north. Venturing down a long hallway, they found 4 colored lights on the wall. They remembered the password that the soldier told them earlier, and hit the lights in the correct order, allowing them to move on. Leading on to what seemed like a subway car, there they fought through hordes of zombies, making their way to the rear of the subway car and exiting. Jumping down a series of ledges and then climbing back up some stairs, they came to an exit and headed into it, running into the Scorpion army again, and they still wanted to get Randy's sword, and were messing around with more robots. This one, the Super Special Deluxe Robot Type 2, they called him Kettlekin. Kettlekin was just a more powerful version of Kilroy, and the sprite used Magic Absorb to prevent the robot from casting more spells. Then they let their weapons do the rest, ending Kettlekin. Finally they reached the end of the underground city, emerging on the other side of the Grand Palace. Once ready, they entered through the bottom on the southeastern corner of the palace. The Grand Palace was one giant puzzle, but the trick they figured out was that they had to open the crystal orbs in the order that they had received the elementals, leading them to a room with switches on the raised platforms. After getting through this and using the last 2 elementals, the pathway opened to the north. When they entered, they encountered the Snapdragon, which was pretty much like the Biting Lizard, and they discovered that the Biting Lizard didn't like Salamando, and hit him with a few good exploders. When Snapdragon fell, a new path leading southward appeared. This new path led to the front entrance of the Grand Palace. Instead of going out the front, Randy and company went southwest. There they found the entrance to the Seed Room. Inside the Seed Room, they discovered the Emperor, but he seemed like he was in a trance. Behind the Emperor was an exit leading to the next room. There they met Thana and Thanatos, where he revealed his plan to take over Dialect's body. Then sending Hexus after Randy. Hexus was powerful, including her Pygmus Glare, which pygmizes her enemies. But after many tries, it was the sprite's Earth Slide that eventually defeated Hexus. After the fight, they were transported to someplace completely new, where Geshtar was again. But this time Geshtar was not the same as before. Still having no particular weakness, the sprite used its magic while Randy and Prim attacked. This was a tough fight and they had to use up all of their resources, but they kept going. But finally Geshtar was gone for good. Even though Geshtar was gone, they still had Thanatos to deal with. Thanatos managed to activate the Mana Fortress, and the Grand Palace began to sink into the sea. Outside, they saw Gemma, and he told them about the Mana Beast. He told them that not all hope was lost though, if they were able to visit the Mana Tree in the Pure Land. By doing so, they would be able to finish powering up the Mana Sword and then challenge the Mana Beast. Having no other option, they summoned Flammy and searched for the Pure Land. After searching for what seemed like forever, they found the Pure Land in the heart of a great volcano. But the volcano was very old and a great forest grew within. Landing there, they immediately headed through the Pure Land, always heading north, trying to find the Mana Tree. They found a cave and went inside. This cave led to a highly overgrown area, and they sensed danger. Soon enough the danger appeared. It was the dragon worm. Its breath could turn enemies to stone, but just like the great serpent before it, it was weak against Thunderbolt. Quickly casting it, they were able to defeat the dragon worm. And again heading north, they came to a stone archway, and a voice began to speak to them. They had to defeat the dragon to the left in order to proceed. Not long after heading left, they entered a large open snowy area where the snow dragon landed. This dragon was huge, but it didn't take them long to figure out its weakness. Salamando was the key. They piled on the heat, and not soon after the snow dragon was gone. Returning to the gate, they were able to move forward, finding another cave, but they weren't able to rest yet. In the cave was Axebeak, who did not like Undyne at all, so after using Freeze, they rendered Axebeak a pile of feathers. When they were done with Axebeak, they noticed a stairway leading north. It led to another gate and another dragon. This was the Red Dragon, a fire dragon. But the group were smart. They knew what to do with fire. So using Freeze again, they put out the Red Dragon's fire and carried on. Hoping they could find a place to rest, they found a Thunder Gigas that was blocking their way. Readying their weapons, the sprite hit the Thunder Gigas with Earth Slide several times when he would come together. Soon the Thunder Gigas was no more, and it turned out they were actually very close to the end. But up ahead was one more dragon gate, and next to it another dragon. Not knowing if they would ever find the Mana Tree, they went to face the Blue Dragon. The Blue Dragon was not much different from the other dragons. The Blue Dragon did not like Gnome, and like the Thunder Gigas, it succumbed to Earth Slide. Passing through this gate, they were wondering what they would have to face next. But as they went forward, they stood at the top of a great cliff, and below them they saw a single huge tree. It was the Mana Tree. They had made it through the Pure Land, passing all the tests, and now finally they could revive the power of the Mana Sword. But before they could move, Thanatos spoke to them telepathically. Using the power of the Mana Fortress, Thanatos obliterated the Mana Tree, causing the trio to fall from the cliff and remained unconscious for a while on the ground. Suddenly, the Mana Tree spoke to them. She told them about the Mana Beast and how it was the only hope to bring mana back to the world. Unfortunately, the Mana Beast was an uncontrollable force whose rage could not be stopped. If the Mana Beast were to attack the fortress, it would mean the end of the world. She also told Randy about his father, Saren, the legendary knight, who should have been the Mana Knight. Learning about his people of the Mana tribe, Randy realized that the ghost he saw near Potos was his father, and the Mana Tree was his mother. The men of the tribe must wield the sword while their wives become the Mana Tree, protecting the world. This was Randy's heritage, and he had to take his father's place, taking up the sword to destroy the evil that threatened everyone. With her last bit of energy, the Mana Tree summoned the power of the 8 Mana Seeds and focused that power on Randy and his companions. Feeling a huge surge of energy, they knew they had the full power of the Mana Seeds at their disposal. Unfortunately, that was the last time Randy's mother spoke. Pulling himself together, he summoned Flammy, and they headed for the fortress. The Mana Fortress loomed over the world, a powerful machine capable of immense destruction. Flammy took them close, and when they were ready they flew high to the level of the fortress itself. Then Flammy took them to its outer deck. They landed and headed inside. Fighting several new and more powerful monsters, they made their way through the fortress, eventually coming to a teleporter. Taking it led them to a huge open room where Buffy laid waiting for them. Buffy was the most powerful of the vampires. With its many attacks and sharp claws, it was a dangerous opponent. But seeing as how Buffy was a creature of the darkness, Lumina was very effective. Prim used a very powerful Lucent Beam, and Buffy was soon beaten. After defeating Buffy, they found another switch that led into the next area. Coming to a fork in the road, they chose the eastern path. Fighting their way across the twisting pathway until they reached a doorway, there in front of them was a large gap. But stepping on a nearby switch, a bridge appeared. It led them to another huge open room with Dread Slime. Dread Slime was the mother of all slimes, and it tried to engulf Randy and his friends. Using Shade against it was most effective. The sprite used Dark Force several times in a row, and it did maximum damage, while Randy and Prim attacked the nuclei in the body of the slime. Dread Slime was gone. Then they continued through the fortress, eventually making it to a room crawling with tsunamis, but there was also a switch that teleported them to a new area of the fortress. It looked over what looked like an engine room. This room powered the fortress. Resting for just a moment, they continued their search for Thanatos. Stepping on one final switch, it teleported them to another room where they finally stood face to face with Thanatos. Thanatos had dialogue with him. He began to tell them about his plans to conquer the world. He was searching for someone with just the right qualities, and none other than Dialect fit the bill. Thanatos was ready to take over Dialect's body and be reborn, but Prim loved Dialect and couldn't let that happen. As Thanatos turned toward Dialect, Prim attacked him. Somehow the attack weakened Thanatos. Maybe she had saved Dialect after all. Unfortunately, Thanatos was not defeated. Prim refused to accept this, but then she heard Dialect's voice. Dialect could not overcome Thanatos' life force, so Dialect used the last of his strength to prevent Thanatos from succeeding and to help Prim and her friends. Just then, as Thanatos' last stand, he transformed to the dark. He transformed into the Dark Lich. The Dark Lich was the master of the underworld. This was the most deadly creature they had ever faced. Though their weapons were very effective, Dark Lich was strong. But again, being a creature of darkness, Lumina was the most effective weapon against it. This was a terrible battle, and at times looked like the odds were against them. But they persisted, and eventually the Dark Lich suffered the fate of all other evil creatures that tried to stop Randy and his companions. Finally, the Dark Lich was gone, and so it seemed was Thanatos. But something began attacking the Mana Fortress. They hurried to the floor switch that took him back outside. The Mana Beast was attacking the fortress. It would mean the end of the world if they didn't stop it. Randy, assessing the situation, didn't really want to hurt the Mana Beast, since it wasn't evil after all. And if the Mana Beast was destroyed, the sprite would disappear. But Randy had no real choice. If he didn't fight, the world would end. So he did what he had to do. The mana beast was immense and powerful, and could not be hurt by ordinary weapons. Only when the mana sword was fully revived could they inflict damage. Priam and the sprite both used Dryad's power on Randy's sword, reviving it instantly. When the mana beast would hover in front of the group, that was the only time they could attack it, before it would fly away and let loose a powerful torrent of flame. Randy, Priam, and the sprite kept repeating this process until finally, the mana beast was no more. And so, after everything the friends had been through, the world was saved and their adventure was over. But not without some sacrifice. Randy's mother, Diluc, and the sprite were gone. Still, peace had been restored, and that was the most important thing. Now, finally, the people of all the lands could be safe, and the world could prosper.